CCU Orlando and Aikens Counseling Center present The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly show featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 18, Who You Were, Part 2. And now, your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson, and special guest, Cassandra Aikens.
Again, welcome back, friends. This is The Authentic Spiritual Journey. I'm Cynthia Alice, and I am the host. And I'm here with not only somebody I consider a friend, but more than that. She's my partner in life. Cassandra Aikens is here for our part 2 of our show about past lives called Who You Were. So welcome, Cassandra. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
And then also, of course, our illustrious producer.
Illustrious.
Yeah.
Illustrious, am I?
Today you are.
This is Dave Croft. What's happening, everybody?
So welcome back. Again, we are friends sharing our authentic spiritual journey. And we decided to bring this topic to you about past lives. I often have people ask me about it. I have myself experienced what we are calling in this work, past life regressions, that have led, in fact, to really important times of healing in my life. So Cassandra's really the expert on this one. What I am is somebody who will do anything nearly to heal, and past life regression is one of them. And it's been an important therapeutic model in my history and continues to be. Regression is very powerful and is a tool for healing not many people maybe know about, and is even shrouded, as we said last show, with a little bit of uncertainty about how it relates.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, I have.
Say a word.
Because I've had a week to chew on it.
Right? Tons of time.
Right. And you know what? I feel like doubting Thomas.
Uh-huh.
But even doubting Tom, even Jesus said, all right, you are well within your rights to say this is crazy. But, check out the scars, check out the wound.
Right.
And even Jesus acknowledged that. He acknowledged Thomas's process.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, yeah.
So totally, in other words, totally fine if you're in process, is what we're trying to say.
Right.
Well, this is difficult to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I think that nobody wants to do trauma work.
Right.
Who wants to do that? But it's important to get back the parts of our soul that fragmented at the time of the trauma. Another word for that is a shamanic, gathering regeneration, getting those pieces back. Because in trauma, our psyche fragments. So we want to do soul retrieval like the shamans do and go back and get that piece that belongs to me so that I can be freer. I can realize my higher potential because I'm not being held down by some sort of negative belief system.
Right. I learned many years ago from one of my mentors about this splitting off that you're talking about. And I think it's really important to spend a little time talking about that. For some of us, this is a brand new idea. Mm-hmm. But the idea, the way it was explained to me, is when we experience a trauma, a little part of us splits off. Mm-hmm. And so in that splitting off, it means we are walking around not in our wholeness, right? The splitting off means there's an aspect that still is remaining in this traumatic state, rather, for lack of a better way of describing it, that we're remaining in this traumatic state, living as if that trauma is still happening. Mm-hmm. That's correct, right?
Correct.
Yes. And so what's so important about this work is that it brings those pieces back in. And so if it is scary to you, some of the things we're talking about, the thing I try to remember is I've already lived through it once. I've lived through the worst. Mm-hmm. And if all I have to do is relive it for a short time to then heal it, well, then to me, that's worth everything. I'm not scared of it because I've already lived through it once.
Mm-hmm. Right. But it's important to have a completion of some sort.
Right.
Yeah. To, I don't want to say the word reframe the story because that it's too...
It's too pop psychology.
Well, it's too sissy. We're not going to, I can reframe your story, but it's not actually going to help much necessarily, especially if it's a trauma that involves the body. You know what I mean? I can reframe it, but if you're holding memory in your body, that's not going to do
Well,
much. You can tell yourself that you've reframed it, but your body's going to tell you a different
otherwise.
story. Yeah.
Well, if we took that example, for instance, let's just follow through either of the examples, the pilot that went from the last show or the thing with my wrist. If I reframe the story, which I didn't even know was there,
Right.
let's say I was aware of it, and let's say I did one of these regressions where you don't go back and heal it, and then I'm like, oh, well, I had the story, and I was this, and this, and then this happened. All the talking about it in the world, if I don't go back and heal it, then I still have arthritis and have to get shots or treatments. And with your modality and the modality of Dr. Woolger, then not only do I get healing on the psychological, emotional, spiritual level, literally a physical healing manifested in my body. So as long as I'm reframing the story, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because it doesn't do anything to the physiology of the body.
Right.
So I'd like to give an example that might help people understand what a session would look like.
Yes.
And
let's talk about that.
and like an actual real story. So I use this example even though this was not my client, but I knew about this story up close and personal. So I was witness to it, but I was not actually the one working with the client. But it's so wild and so important to understand how these complexes can carry over lifetime after lifetime. So the presenting people were the children of this mother, and the mother was described by the children as being very smothering. She wanted to know everything the children were doing, everything, and it was. The children were like getting older. They were like 18, 20 years old. And mother was like, where are you going? What's going to, I need you to call me. Da, da, da. And they were like, our mother is driving us nuts, And so the mother's like, I don't know where it comes from. I can't help it. I've tried to stop. And so the mother decided to do a regression. And so her story was that it was during the war. And she was a Holocaust victim, and she was she was in with the group of everyone, including her children, and then she got separated from her children. And then she got sent to the ovens, and her last dying thought was, "I didn't protect my children. I wasn't there for my children. I couldn't be there for my children." And then she died. And so this was, of course, the story was a difficult story. And some of these stories are difficult, but we encourage the catharsis because we want to thaw the frozen feelings. And so she was able to, we took her to her death, which was the ovens, and then she went into the spiritual realm or the after-death state that we call the bardo. And that's where reconciliation, forgiveness, the reworking of the story, all of that happens in the bardo. And so, so she replayed the story, and sometimes in the regression work, we will replay the story a lot. To loosen up that complex, especially if the emotions are flat. If the emotions have been repressed and I just can't cry because I had to leave my children, then there's something that's not natural about that. And that tells us that it's been really repressed. So in her story, in the bardo, she met her children of that lifetime. And she got to go to them and say, "I am so sorry." And she was bawling her eyes out. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. And, we got separated. I couldn't help it." And it's the things she didn't get to complete in that lifetime.
Right.
And the children in the bardo, the children were like, "We're fine. We know you love us. And you don't have to, you couldn't help it." So there was a lot of forgiveness and reconciliation that happened in that particular story. And that freed up the woman in this life to not have to be so concerned about her children. She had an idea that her belief system was, "I'll lose my children."
I believe it.
Something's bad is going to happen to my children. And she was able to free that complex. And of course, when we do past life regression therapy, I always encourage people, let's take the complex and let's still work it, because sometimes complexes are so big, we don't free enough of it in one session. It may take several sessions.
Yes.
And so the therapy then would help with that. And sometimes doing even more than one regression therapy. So that's an example of how a story can affect us in today's life. And I think I'm going to be vulnerable and share a story.
Okay.
That when one of my major complexes, and this is an irrational belief, thought process, was that if I did anything like study Jungian psychology and talk about it, if I did soul work and talked about it, if I did past life regression work and talk about it, that I would get in trouble, some sort of trouble. I might die from it. I might go to jail. Like, I'm going to go to jail if I talk about Jungian psychology. And
and can I just say that going back to what you said last show, that's not rational and logical, and that is a clue or a hint that there might be something else going on.
Something else was going on. So I did lots of regression sessions around so many different stories, because the story can change. It's the resonance that stays the same.
Yes.
So I can't speak my truth is pretty much the resonance, right? And so I did a lot of work on that complex, and I'm happy to say that I'm pretty, able to talk about things. However, coming over here tonight, because I left work, I like, skidded out of a work day and came straight here, and I started noticing, what am I doing? My body was kind of like a little nervous.
The anxiety started kicking in.
The anxiety started kicking in. So I said, okay, what is this? This is not rational.
Right.
And so I put on some soft music in the car, turned off the radio, put in some soft music, and the only thing that was interrupting me was Siri telling me how to get here.
I gotta love Siri.
But I, all of a sudden, I said, this is a bleed through of a past life where you're not supposed to talk about your passion. You're not supposed to talk about what it is that you believe in.
Yes.
You're going to be hung, or you're going to be beaten, or you're going to be kicked out of the tribe or whatever if you share this. And then I was able to say, that's over.
Right.
That life is over. You don't have to carry that belief anymore. And so I was fine by the time I got here. But honestly, that's how these complexes work.
Yes.
I have a question. If there's somebody listening right now, and let's say you are in relationship with someone who has a complex like this, or something, how would you recommend the support system around that person? How would you recommend they proceed?
So I'm assuming they're in therapy with me or something?
Not necessarily. Like
maybe they need to be.
Right. Well, I don't know. I think we've talked about this before. Shannon getting out of Memphis and everything, that was really rough.
Sure.
And we call it PTSD.
Yes.
Oh, it is.
And so there are times when something completely kind of innocuous would happen, and then when we call it triggered, and now suddenly it's like irrational, crying, and it doesn't make any sense. And I'm there like, this person's falling apart. What do I do? So I guess what I'm asking is, for listeners out there who maybe they haven't, or I don't want to say don't need to do that work, but maybe they're loving or supporting someone who either needs to do the work or is working their process. How would you recommend they move forward in supporting that person?
Well, that's
loaded.
That's a loaded question,
Sorry.
a great question. I have several responses. One, I might say, is the complex of the partner that which says, I have to solve my partner's problems. I have to fix everything. I have to save them
Ruh-roh.
Are you saying is that my complex?
No, I don't know what your complex is, but I'm saying in that story that you just
Right.
gave me,
Purely hypothetical, of course.
Oh yeah, it's always I have a friend.
Right,
who-
asking for a friend.
yeah, we love that.
we
Yeah.
love those. Yeah, I have a friend that wants to know. So that could be part of it. It could be, look, we all have complexes.
We all do.
I do believe, and this is just my own personal worldview, that that everyone has trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That if you have ever felt less than totally loved, if you've ever felt that you were less than adored and that you were less than a perfect child of God, you've been abused. And you've had trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so we enter into our relationships with our complexes. And I've found in my experience that the complexes are a perfect match. They're a perfect puzzle piece. Like the maker, the source, whatever, God, puts these pieces together, and our complexes complement one another so well. And so at some point, I think it's important for each person in a relationship to look at their own trauma, their own complexes, their own shadow, their own what they bring to the relationship, and then go from there. And of course, it's tricky because we want to help people. I'm not saying don't help your partner,
Sure, yeah. This is yours.
This is
I'm
yours.
in my complex.
But where am I?
Yeah, I've got enough.
That's right. Everybody's complex.
Yeah, that
and
looks like
nothing's
it
happening.
sucks, but I'm gonna be over here.
That's right.
Well, what's funny to be in relationship with somebody who talks about this stuff, it's we speak the same language, which is actually really, really helpful in terms of, if one of us is triggered and we know it, to say, okay, I'm really complex right now, so please don't listen to a word I'm saying. I know I'm complexed and not even making sense right now, and the other one can say, yeah, absolutely you are, or, what do you need?
Well, no, you nailed it. I totally go into fix it mode. I'm going into big, and my dad and my high school sweethearts, my parents, all that stuff. and so Shannon has learned to say, you don't need to fix this, Dave.
Yeah, right, right.
And so that's also led to I'm sitting back, not fixing it, and she's like, what does a girl have to do to get a hug? So it's like that. I was over here not fixing it. I don't know.
I love you. Go away. Yes.
I'm not going to fix anything. You're on your own.
Well, and I think even our children, oftentimes we have been together before, and maybe in another life, they were our parent. In another life, they were our spouse. And so when they're reborn into our family this time, that can be, there can be a depth, a large, far-reaching implication in terms of issues in the relationship. So, for the people out there that say, that kid just needs tough love, maybe. But they may need a safe place to share what's going on. They may remember, in fact, the past lives, and I've experienced that with children before. They don't have the problem that the adults do of not believing in it because they're still so close to source that often up until age 10, kids are seeing chakras, they're seeing angels, they're remembering what their past lives were. So it's normally the grown-ups that have a problem with that. But these things we're speaking of are far-reaching in terms of their implications for relationships in the here and now.
Absolutely. And when each person can take responsibility for their own complexes and other things that we all bring to our relationships, that's where the real healing begins. Each person, in other words, the relationship, if it's in trouble, it's not because the relationship's in trouble. It's because the people that are in the relationship are bringing mostly unconscious parts of themselves, usually complexes that interfere. That's what makes us fight. That's what makes us not talk to each other, or whatever our coping mechanism that we've learned to do. Is not necessarily healthy. Most of the time, it is not healthy.
Right. And so often in relationships, and I've certainly had a couple of long-term relationships, and I have seen in my own life and seen in counseling of others as well. Oftentimes, there's so much blaming going on, people are not looking at themselves in the first place. I've also seen other relationships where just as they're about to heal something, they give up because they keep trying to fix the relationship rather than themselves coming to the relationship. So that's a real important aspect. This, and friends, we always come back to this in terms of the authentic spiritual journey, which is our own personal responsibility in every relationship, that we're ultimately, I'm 100% responsible for who I am in every relationship. Relationships are not 50-50. They're 100-100. And so this is, well, down south we say this is grist for the mill. This is fodder to really think about, how are we walking through relationships? What are the impacts of our past lives impacting us now, and then how is that impacting our behavior, with the ones we love the most?
Yes. And I wanted to talk about, just for a second, Marie-Louise von Franz, who was one of Carl Jung's, for lack of a better word, disciples. She was a right-hand person for him. And she did a lot of work on complexes. And one of the things she says is, and if you never remember anything else, this is so powerful. She said, complexes demand obedience.
Yes. Oh.
And they possess us. It's almost like The Exorcist. Remember that movie, The Exorcist, where the girl got possessed by the devil or whatever, and then her head spun around when she was...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So complexes do the same thing. When we're gripped by a complex, then that's running a whole story that's probably not even true. And so if we obey that truth, in other words, if we have not had the opportunity to bring to consciousness that which is unconscious,
Correct.
Then it's going to ruin everything. Von Franz says complexes will ruin our relationships, our workplace, our health. And so because we're human, we have lots of complexes. So it's a constant, trying to be a better person, a better human, is healing those parts of ourselves so that we don't bring our reactions to a relationship, an organization, whatever.
Right. And so, friends, we remember healing is possible. So we're going to talk more about the healing aspect as we come back after a few minutes.
We'll return to the program in just a few moments, but first, we wanted to give a special word of thanks to our podcast partner, CCU Orlando, who has helped make this episode of the Authentic Spiritual Journey possible. Christ Church Unity is a welcoming community dedicated to transforming lives, celebrating diversity, and supporting soul growth. CCU Orlando is located at 771 Holden Avenue in Orlando, Florida, with Sunday services at 9 and 11 a.m. You can stream services live online as well as learn more at christchurchunity.net. We would also like to extend our thanks to our podcast partner, Aikens Counseling Center. Cassandra Aikens is a licensed mental health counselor dedicated to creating sacred space where clients can explore their own inner process in a safe, non-judgmental, and supportive environment. She works with individuals, couples, and groups who are seeking to live a more authentic life. Aikens Counseling Center is located in Winter Park, Florida, and can be found on the web at CassandraAikens.com. We now return you to this week's episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey.
Again, friends, welcome back. We're glad that you are joining us here on the Authentic Spiritual Journey. Again, we are friends having spiritual conversations, and today I'm so happy to have my partner on the show because I think so much of her and her work, and in fact have experienced the same modality that she is a practitioner of, this type of past life regression. I think it has another name, though. Isn't it called deep memory process?
It's called deep memory process. Rogers changed it several times, but the last, before he passed away, it was deep memory process, or DMP.
DMP, yeah, that's cool.
Now, how does this? Forgive me. Isn't there a therapy called like EMSR or EMDR or something?
EMDR.
Is that that's nothing? Has nothing to do with this, does it?
Well, EMDR is a trauma-based therapy, so it helps with people that have been through trauma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And you've had,
but it's different. It's different then.
Right. I just heard letters. I'm like,
Yeah.
And there are a lot of alternative, what I don't know if I would call alternative therapies. I think as we're talking about regression, it is a transpersonal therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we might talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I'd like to, excuse me, say that it's a combination of different types of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a psychodrama therapy that we hope to have a catharsis over, to change the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's also it can be Gestalt therapy. It can be
Right.
cognitive therapy. It can bring in, or it does bring in, the Tibetan death bardo. So it's a combination of a lot of things. So that's one of the reasons that I have so much respect for it is Roger's study of a lot of different modalities kind of come together in one practice.
Yeah, and we talked about this last show, and maybe a little bit the first part of this show. It's kind of all running together now, but that some of the methodologies, for lack of a better word, or therapies I've heard about as I've myself counseled people who've been through them, is that there's not always a lot of healing in this particular model, the deep memory process and the regression that you do, and some of your colleagues do that I've experienced. In fact, goes back and it helps you heal the complex and then bring that healing into this life. So I really think it's important to talk about how that is set apart from some of the other therapies, because again, just a trip down memory lane in past lives might be interesting, but in fact is not healing.
Mm-hmm.
In the way I view it. And I know, because of so many people I've dealt with, after a session like that, and they're largely confused, they don't know what to do with the information.
Mm-hmm.
And it even at times, for a few people, has brought the energy of that life even more present into their lives because now they're aware of it. Or in fact, they were told a false story because somebody else was telling them about what their past life was. So speak to that, if you will, just a little bit.
Well, the DMP method relies on the person telling the story.
Right.
So no one's laying your past life on top. No one's saying, oh, you were decapitated when you were 7 in merry old England. No one's doing that. You're coming up with the story. You're using your imagination to access the information that's in the source of all that non-material vibrational patterns. And then you're going with the story and you're making the movie as you go.
And I want to just mention an aside here, if you don't mind, because you mentioned imagination a couple times, and I am a unity minister, and as a unity minister, I teach about the 12 powers, and even at the church during the next several weeks, we're speaking about these powers, and one of those powers, in fact, is the power of imagination. And it's important that we really honor that power. And what I know from working with children is that power is always very right at the surface. But with adults, often that power has been muted, for lack of a better word. And so some of these therapies or methodologies help us bring this power even more to life because we are made aware of it, through this work. So I had to mention that imagination, in fact, is one of our innate 12 powers given to us in the Christ consciousness.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think Einstein even said something like, I'll probably butcher it, but it was something like, imagination's even more important than intelligence.
Yes.
The ability to imagine is better than the ability to be intellectual.
Right. And by the way, Harry Connick has a great version of that song. Imagination is funny. I know, no more, Dave. I know, I can't sing anymore.
No, right. The quote from Albert Einstein
Yep.
is, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand.
Wow. That's powerful,
That's
right?
powerful. That's powerful. And it engages the soul.
It engages the soul, yeah. Because your story is coming from your soul.
That's right. That's
right.
right.
So you're coming up with a story that no one else is coming up with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, and I want you to correct me seriously if I'm wrong on this, but you have to be at a certain place in consciousness to really be able to trust yourself with this kind of work, because it does break some of the stereotypes you have about life. And in other words, many of us are taught, okay, what you see is what you get, and I've got enough to deal with this life. Why deal with past lives? So you have to get to a certain place in consciousness and a certain place of spiritual awareness to even be able to consider doing this work. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The saying, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
And so that includes our past lives. If we don't know where our soul has journeyed and where it's come from, or if we don't have some kind of a context for it, then we're doomed to repeat whatever it is in the form of the complex.
Yeah, and I think what's so important in this show, and virtually the whole show, Authentic Spiritual Journey, is largely about how we have the capacity to heal. And so for me, that's really important, especially with this topic. Again, this is not about just learning who we were, because frankly, that part's not usually very interesting. It's it's what happened and what needs to be healed to move us forward this lifetime on the spiritual journey. And so I think there is a misconception that past life work is simply because it's interesting. As a matter of fact, it's difficult, it's harrowing, but it's also very rewarding and very joyous when we move through the trauma and into the healing, and then again bringing that energy into this life. So I want to make sure we spend enough time on the healing aspect of this particular modality, because it is tremendous in the healing energy it brings into our lives.
Do you find that most of your clients that come through your door, they have very intense, like somebody was in the Holocaust, somebody was a World War II pilot, these very pretty intense things. Do you find that it's like that because those are types of traumas which resonate through lifetimes, versus someone who, like I said, was just a wager in Belgium and led a completely normal life and nothing traumatic ever happened. And so because there was no trauma in that life, then it doesn't reverberate. Is that true, or is...
Well, if there's no trauma in a particular lifetime, which is almost impossible, but if there's no trauma that affects you, then it's not a problem. But trauma can be covert or it can be overt. So there can be stories, trauma can happen where, for instance, if my father breaks my arm, I know he broke my arm. There's no doubt about it. I can say he broke my arm when I was 9 because I didn't take the garbage out when he told me to, whatever. Or it can be more subtle and more covert, where maybe it's emotional abuse and I don't quite know it's emotional abuse, so it's hard to see it. So I think that people have, some of the most difficult stories that I've worked with are the ones that are not big stories, like being shot out of an airline, a jet fighter, or Holocaust, stories of starvation. I starved in my past life, and now I have, when the dinner is placed on the table, I want the biggest steak on the platter.
Yeah.
I want more ice cream than anybody else.
Yes.
There's not enough food. And that can be a complex that comes from, certainly it's traumatic to starve, but it doesn't, and sometimes I think in our worldview, especially because a lot of people think that things that are traumatic aren't traumatic. So I see all kinds of stories.
Okay.
Yeah. Losing money, being very poor in a past life. I was a peasant in merry old England, and I had a business and it burned, and then I lost all my money. So maybe that manifests in my present life as not being able to hold on to the family fortune, or not being able to manage my money well, or always expecting something terrible to happen in my business. Oh, something's going to happen. I just know it's going to happen, but I don't know where that's coming from.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So virtually everybody has some kind of bleed through from a past life. I mean, I don't know. of anybody, say, who wouldn't.
When you said bleed through an image, you said it earlier, and it came to mind. Do you remember like old 8-track tapes, and you
yes.
could like record on them and everything?
Oh, yeah.
And how sometimes if you recorded over something, you would
Still hear
faint echoes from the other side.
Yes.
That is a wonderful image.
You know, and it's there, it's faint, and when it's on top of each other, you don't hear it, but it's in the gaps. You know, this song is over, and then you hear this faint echo from the flip side of the tape.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, when I lived in Phoenix, and this was a wild experience that I had, and moving to Phoenix, I loved being there, but I loved so much of being there, but I was actually sick the whole time I was there, physically sick. But in that time of living there, I was also very involved with horses and horseback riding and things like that. And so the past life bleed through that would happen is I would pull up my car somewhere, like let's say I was going to the grocery store, and I would think, where am I going to park my horse? and it was like a really bizarre and feeling. I had this friend who very much believes in past lives. He's worked a lot on karma and reincarnation and studied about it for many, many years, both Eastern traditions, and he has a teacher that he works with on it. Anyway, I told him about it, and he goes, "Wow, past life bleed through, man. That is crazy." Mm-hmm. And I had never heard it called that, but it was like, yes, that's exactly what it was. And I've always felt like, even my getting sick in Phoenix, it was something I was trying to complete there through all of that, and it was related to horses and all of that, but I had been there before because I kept looking for a place to park my horse. So it was a total past life bleed through.
Mm-hmm. That's so funny. I love that analogy or that image. I did a music session last weekend with some people, and I recorded a set on Guitar Band. And I was Garage Band, I'm sorry. And I was playing the set, and before that I played something on iTunes, and I forgot to turn off the iTunes. And so the music was played loudly. Nobody even noticed. But as soon as there was a faint gap in the music, I heard the bleed through from iTunes. And I was like, I got to go turn that off right now. So that's a great image. And I think that's how it works.
Yeah. Yes, most definitely. I mean, that is a wonderful image to think about, because it's like we're going along living our lives, yet there's this thing we don't know that's playing in the background, and sometimes it's not in the background, it's at the forefront, and we don't even realize it. And as you said before the break, about this need to heal, because if we don't look at it, it is running our show. So this thing that's meant to be in the background or not at all is at the forefront running our show. And we don't want our wounded parts running our show. Mm-hmm. And I know we're wrapping it up in the next few minutes here, so I really want to talk a little bit about that, just a little bit more, if you can, about the healing aspect, how that's important. Where does that move us on the journey?
Well, Dr. Woolger said, if you want to know who you are, you need to know who you were.
Yes.
And so if I have these complexes that are holding me back, if I am not the best human being I can be, then that's the healing path, is what stands in the way of me being more authentic, with more of my soul parts back that I fragmented when I was in a certain trauma. Mm-hmm. How do I get those parts of myself back? Because actually they belong to me. I want them. I don't want them spinning in my energy field in an orbit, spinning a story that, using that story from earlier, all men will hurt me. Mm-hmm. Right. Anything.
What a limiting worldview. All men will hurt me.
Yeah. And so guess what? They do.
Yes.
Because that's the belief. Yeah. And I'm trying to master the trauma, so I'm going to attract to me men that hurt me. Mm-hmm. And is it true that all men will hurt me? No,
of course
that's not true.
Of course not. Yeah.
And so when I can get to the source of the belief system, the source of the frozen feelings, the source of stuck energy in the body, and bring together the fragments of the story, that's the healing. That's the whole purpose of past life journeying.
Right.
past life
To
regression.
get to the healing and then to get to our wholeness. So, friends, if you're listening, especially if this topic is new to you, I really want to encourage you to give it contemplation, thought. Feel free to do research online. Look up things, ask us questions, which I know you can do. Dave will give you all that information.
Yeah, and Cassandra, you're a sponsor of the show. That's not why we have you on. You're not here just because fulfill some obligation, but we're here because we really believe in that and what you're doing. If our listeners, can they contact you through your website? And is it just to Orlando area people, or can you talk a little bit about how someone could find some help?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is my name, CassandraAkins.com. That's Cassandra with one S and two A's next to each other, .com. And there's contact information on the website. I've done workshops all over the United States. I've done workshops outside of the United States. I do sessions. Sometimes I do sessions when I travel. I've done a lot of individual sessions when I travel. And then people come and see me in Winter Park for individual sessions. So all of that's possible.
I'm glad you said that because we're going to be in Nashville coming up and Seattle later in the year. So if we have listeners in that part of the country, definitely hook us up. We love to do that when we're in different parts of the country. And again, friends, I want you to really remember healing is possible for you, and we hold that with you. This is an important show because we know all of us have things that hold us back, old issues, complexes, traumas. And what we want to do is give you tools for the spiritual journey. We want to see you moving forward and, in fact, moving into your wholeness. That's the whole reason we're here, to support you on the spiritual journey. And as we like to say at CCU Orlando, the spiritual journey of the evolving soul. So we're glad you joined us today, dear friends. As always, if this program has, in fact, supported you, feel free to share it. Subscribe to us, share it on your social media, and do so with a lot of love and care, because there may be a special person in your life that could really benefit from this show and might even open up channels of communication about some of these issues. So we encourage you to be well on the journey. Know we are lifting you up for all good things, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey, presented by CCU Orlando and Akins Counseling Center here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible through the continued support of our angel patrons, Dove Borland, Angela Martinez, Peter Gibson, Paul Caswell, and Two Spirits Health Services, along with our partner patrons, CCU Orlando and Akins Counseling Center. If you would like to help be a part of bringing shows like this and other programs to the channel, please consider becoming a patron. For information, episode show notes, and details about our other shows on the channel, head over to experienceofthesoul.com. And if you enjoyed this program, you can help spread the word by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, or the podcast platform of your choice. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2018, Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Shannon Croft and used with permission. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.